to the fountain. Dip your heart in the stream of life. Let the pain and the sorrow be washed away in the waves of his mercy. As deep cries out to deep, come Lord Jesus, come Lord Jesus, come Lord Jesus.
Hello, thank you for joining us for Jesus for Newbies, Lesson 7. So, up until this point, we saw God create the world. And from the very beginning of creation, God told humanity that there was a Messiah coming. Humanity separated themselves from life, but God was sending a Messiah, a Christ, to give life back to humanity. And people waited. God promised Abram that from his family would come a great nation, and that nation was born and became Israel. And that nation had a king named Solomon that disobeyed God. The nation was split into two nations, the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. But there was always a promise that that nation would be replaced by a good king, a Messiah, a Christ, and that king would establish a new kingdom. We've been looking, we ended last week looking at some of the prophecies in Isaiah. Now, Isaiah is written over 600 years before Jesus was born. So when we look at these prophecies, these are telling us how to recognize the Messiah and what the Messiah would be like. In Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, there shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. His delight is in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what the sight of his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and divide with equity from the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall slay the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt about his loins, and faithfulness the belt about his waist. The prophecy said, first it says, there shall come forth a rod. Now, a rod was a thing a shepherd used. A shepherd used the staff, that's the crooked staff, was to redirect the sheep or to grab the sheep by the neck and pull him to safety. But the rod was different. The rod was to fight off animals that were threatening the sheep. The rod was to defend the sheep. It tells us here that from the family of Jesse would come a rod. And then when we say from the family of Jesse, Jesse was King David's father. So here we have the prophecy say that from the family of David would come the Messiah, and that would be born a rod. Now this rod would come, this king would be different from other kings. You know, a lot of times kings weren't righteous. A lot of times kings were evil. He said, the prophecy says the king wouldn't judge by what his eye see, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor. You know, he tells us here that when the Messiah came, he would be kind to the poor and be equitable. In verse 4, the last part of verse 4, it says, he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall slay the wicked. One of the names the Messiah would wear is simply word. The Messiah would bring words of salvation, words of hope, words of promises from God Almighty. And those words would lead people from this world to the next one. In verse 6, the wolf also shall dwell with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the young goat, the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play by the cobra's hole, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the viper's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. This kingdom would be different. He tells us that this kingdom would have a wolf lie with a lamb. Well, that doesn't make sense, right? If a wolf lies down with the lamb, the wolf is going to eat the lamb. The prophecy said enemies would come together in this kingdom and be at peace. That the kingdom Jesus was going to establish, the Messiah, the kingdom that was going to come much later, would be a kingdom of all kinds of different people. In this time period, things were very tribal, very according to your race. The people and tribes would attack other people and tribes. The Philistines constantly attacked the Israelites, and then Israel was conquered by the Babylonians and the Assyrians. And this prophecy said that when the Messiah comes, the new kingdom would have these enemies inside the kingdom. You know, it's interesting, the church, I used to go to a church and preach at a church in Detroit, and that church would have people from Pakistan and India sitting on the same row. Well, that wouldn't happen. Normally, they would be enemies, but here in the kingdom, we come together at peace. The wolf and the lamb would lie together. In verse 10, it says, "And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse who shall stand as a banner to the people, for the Gentiles shall seek him, and his resting place shall be glorious." He tells us what it means by the wolf and the lamb lying together, that the Gentiles would be part of this new kingdom. It wouldn't just be a kingdom of Jews, and the little child will lead them. When the Messiah came, he would come as a child. Let's turn to Psalm chapter 22, verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? Now, this was written by King David, but it's written in Psalms. Now, Psalms is interesting because it's an old songbook of the synagogue. Songs are amazing mnemonic devices, aren't they? You probably learned your books of the Bible by singing a song. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts letter to the Romans. You probably learned your ABCs by learning a song too, didn't you? The thing I want you to understand about music is it has a way of triggering the memory. And if you look at right before the text of the psalm, it says, "To the chief musician set to the deer of the dawn, a psalm of David." So you can see that this was a song in a songbook. So they would have opened this songbook. Now, back in the day, they didn't have the psalms numbered. They would just refer to them. They'd identify the specific psalm to sing by the first line. Now, this psalm is about heartache of David, but when David was writing this, God inspired him to tell the story of the cross in first person. Jesus on the cross said, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," that is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus was telling them to read Psalm 22. They would have recognized that because they sang it in synagogue. They knew this song. And immediately as he uttered those words, they would understand that all the cross was part of God's eternal plan. And it was written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus was born. Let's go to verse 12 of Psalm 22. "Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They gape at me with their mouths like a raging and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaves to my jaws. You brought me to the dust of death, for dogs have surrounded me. The congregation of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet." This is phenomenal. We use three words to describe God. We use omniscient, which means God is all-knowing. We use omnipotent to say that God is all-knowing. But this has to do with the omnipresence of God, that God is present all the time, but also all the time in time and space. He's present in the past, the present, and the future at the same time. And here Jesus, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before he was born, tells us about the cross. And this is written in first person. This is Jesus telling what it feels like to be crucified. "Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They gape at me with their mouths like a raging and roaring lion. I'm poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint." The cross was they nailed nails into your wrists and to your feet, and you were like this, and it put you in a position where you couldn't breathe. So in order to breathe, you had to pull yourself up like this, and you could breathe until you were so exhausted that you couldn't breathe anymore, and you go down like this, and would slowly dislocate your shoulders. I'm poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within me. What would it be like? Remember, he's the everlasting Father. He's been with each one of these people their entire life, and he loved them. These people that were spitting on him, these people placing crowns of thorns on him, these people beating him, he loved. How would that affect your heart? My heart is like wax. It is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd. My tongue cleaves to my jaws. You have brought me to the dust of death. A potsherd was a piece of broken pottery in the fire. How dry would a potsherd be? For dogs have surrounded me. A band of evildoers having circlosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look, they stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. If you didn't know, it was talking about the cross. By the time this text written hundreds of years before Jesus was born, this text written by his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather David says, they pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look, they stare at me. Part of his punishment was stripes. It was a leather piece of wood with leather strap, a piece of wood with leather straps tied to it. And on the end of each strap was something sharp, metal or glass. They would go like this, and it would rip through, and they would rip out. And the end process was that you could actually see ribs. I can count all my bones. They look, they stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. At the cross, Jesus had a tunic that they cast lots for hundreds of years before Jesus was born. It was told what the crucifixion would be like. He told what the crucifixion would be like through his great-great-grandfather David as he was inspired to write this psalm. And they sang this psalm on Saturdays as they're waiting for the Messiah to come. They sang this song about the crucifixion. And all of a sudden at the cross, Jesus says, read Psalm 22. Remember Psalm 22. And that song would come to their mind, and they would realize this wasn't something that was an accident. It was prophesied that a spotless lamb would come to the earth and that we would kill him. Let's turn to Micah chapter 5, verse 2. The prophecy is told about the Messiah coming and that he would be born in Bethlehem. But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be a ruler in Israel, whose going forth and are from old, from everlasting. This is something surprising about the Messiah. The Messiah wasn't just going to be a king. The Messiah wasn't just going to be a teacher or a prophet. The Messiah would be from everlasting. Remember that word, omnipresent? Jesus would be part of God, come to the earth, incarnate on the earth from everlasting. He would be someone born, a baby born into this world who did not have a beginning. And he would be born in the city of Judah, Bethlehem. Let's turn to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 31, verse 15. Thus says the Lord, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted for her children because they were no more. 600 years before Jesus was born, a dark prophecy came to light. That when the Messiah was born, there would be an evil king, and that evil king would kill the babies of Bethlehem trying to find and kill the Messiah. Satan was terrified of the Christ, the idea of the Messiah. In Matthew chapter 2, verse 16, it says, Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry, and he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all the districts from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. The prophecy were pointing to a time when the Messiah would come. From the very beginning of time, there was a gospel plan. From the very beginning of time, when evil came into the world, God knew he would have to come to the world himself to save his children. He talked about it. He wrote about it. He had the people sing about it. He told them when it would happen, how it would happen, what city it would happen in, that the gospel, the good news of redemption of sin and everlasting life would come through the Christ, the Messiah. And he would be born in Bethlehem, and he would save his people who weren't just Jews, who were all of us. The wolf and the lamb would be together. Thank you for joining us for Jesus for Newbies Lesson 7. We'll have another lesson next week.